The key was still warm in Sera's fist when the first thing went wrong. She was sitting on the stone bench in the June garden with the front of Vittorio's shirt twisted in her other hand, and Manhattan was glowing on the southern horizon, and the roses were dark shapes against a darker sky, and for the length of one held breath she believed the story was over. That the locked door was open. That the worst thing either of them carried had already been set down on this bench beside a silver-framed photograph of a dead girl. She was wrong. She had been wrong about endings her entire life. Vittorio felt her go still against him, not the comfortable stillness of the last hour, the other kind. The kind she had spent 25 years perfecting, the kind that meant something in her had detected a sound the rest of the world had not heard yet. "What is it?" he said. "Nothing." She unwound her fingers from his shirt. "I thought I saw something." "Sera." "It was nothing, Vittorio. A light. Across the wall." She looked at the eastern edge of the garden, where the stone wall ran 12 feet high and the wrought iron gate opened onto the service road. There was nothing there now. There had been something a second ago. A small cold point of light, the kind a phone screen makes when someone lifts it to take a photograph and then thinks better of it and lowers it again. She had seen that exact light before, years ago, in a window across the street from her mother's funeral, where a man had stood and watched the small gathering of mourners and had not come down to join them because he had not been invited, because everyone there knew what he had done. She put the thought away. She was good at putting things away. It was the second skill her father had taught her, after stillness. You take the thing you cannot afford to feel, and you fold it small, and you put it in the place where you keep the other folded things, and you do not open that place unless you have a reason and a plan and an exit. "Come inside," she said. "It's cold." It was not cold. It was a warm June night. But Vittorio stood when she stood, because he had spent 6 months learning that, when Sera said a thing that was not quite true, the truth was usually underneath it, and the way to reach the truth was not to argue with the surface. They walked back through the garden toward the estate, his hand at the small of her back, and Sera did not look at the eastern wall again, because looking would tell whoever was there that she had seen them, and the first rule of surviving a predator was the rule she had recited to Vittorio in the library months ago. You do not look like prey. But she knew. Somewhere in the marrow of her, in the part that had kept her alive in a house in the Bronx where love was a thing that arrived with a raised hand, she knew. Her father had found her. The estate had changed in 6 months. Vittorio had spent 40 years building it into a fortress, and a fortress is a thing designed to keep the world out, but Sera had spent 6 months quietly turning it into something else. A home is a fortress that has decided to let one person in. The locked room at the end of the West Gallery was open now, aired out, the narrow bed replaced with bookshelves, 87 paperbacks brought over from the apartment in Astoria and arranged by era, ancient to modern, and a reading chair set by the window where the curtain used to stay drawn. Scipio the cat had claimed the chair within an hour of arriving and had not relinquished it since. He was a Roman general. He understood territory. Gianna's photograph had a new home too, not in the locked room, because the room was no longer locked and no longer a shrine. Vittorio had moved the silver frame to the library mantel, where it sat in the open, in the light, a young woman in a white dress smiling at a camera held by a boy who did not know what was coming. Sera had suggested it. She had said a person you loved should not live behind a locked door. They should live in the room where you spend your evenings, where you can see them, where their being gone is a fact you carry in the light instead of a secret you keep in the dark. Vittorio had wept when she said it. He did not weep easily. He had wept perhaps 4 times in his adult life, and 2 of those times had been in the last 6 months, and both of those times had been because of something Sera said that took a thing he had carried as shame and held it up to the light and called it grief instead. This was the life her father walked back into. He did it the way he did everything, patiently, from the periphery. The way a man stands at a funeral he was not invited to and watches and waits and lets the watching do its work. The first contact came 3 days after the light on the wall. It came the way contact from her father had always come when she was a child, indirectly, through an object, a thing left in a place where she would find it and understand and say nothing. She found it in her coat pocket. She had hung the coat by the service entrance, the way she still did out of habit, even though she no longer arrived through the service entrance, even though she was the lady of the house now and could hang her coat anywhere she pleased. Old habits are the hardest doors to lock. She put her hand in the pocket on her way out to the garden, and her fingers closed around a small brass object, and her whole body went cold before her mind even told her what it was. It was a key. Not Vittorio's key. A different key. Small, brass, worn smooth at the edges from decades of handling, the kind of key a locksmith keeps as a sample, the kind her father had kept on a ring on his belt and had spun on his finger at the dinner table while he decided whether the evening would be a quiet one or not. She knew this key. She had grown up with the sound of this key. The soft, metallic whisper of it spinning on his finger had been the sound that told her and her mother whether to breathe. There was no note. There did not need to be a note. The key was the note. The key said, "I am here." The key said, "I know where you sleep." The key said, "The door you think is locked has never been locked to me, because I am the man who taught the world that no door is ever truly locked, and I made my living proving it, and I made my daughter the same way I made my living, by finding the weak point and applying pressure until the thing gave way." Sera stood at the service entrance with the key in her palm, and the June evening going gold around her, and she did the thing she had taught Vittorio was a betrayal. She closed her fist around the key. She put it in her pocket, and she decided to handle it alone. She told herself it was protection. She told herself Vittorio had spent 40 years building a fortress and 6 months learning to live in a home, and he did not need her father's poison seeping into the foundation. She told herself she had survived this man for 16 years before she ever met Vittorio, and she could survive him now. She told herself a great many things, standing at that service entrance, and every one of them was a brick in the same wall her father had taught her to build, and she did not recognize the architecture because she had been living inside it her whole life. She walked out to the garden where Vittorio was waiting with 2 glasses of wine and a question in his eyes that she had taught him to ask only with his eyes, and she smiled, and she lied with her whole steady face, the way her father had taught her. "Everything all right," Vittorio said. "Everything's fine," Sera said. And the key sat in her pocket like a stone, and the man who had given it to her stood somewhere beyond the eastern wall, patient, waiting, spinning a second key on his finger and listening to the sound it made. His name was Desmond Calloway, and he had not raised his hand to anyone in 11 years, because the people he used to raise his hand to had all left or died or grown too large to hit. His wife had left first, 16 years ago. She had taken their daughter and a suitcase and the $400 from the coffee can, and Desmond had let them go, not out of mercy but out of calculation, because a locksmith knows that the harder you grip a thing the more likely it is to break, and a broken thing has no value. He had always intended to collect them again. He was a patient man. He had simply been waiting for the right moment, for the moment when collecting them would be worth the effort. For years there had been no moment. His wife had worked a register and then gotten sick and then died, and Desmond had stood across the street from her funeral and felt nothing except a mild irritation that she had died before he could decide what to do with her. His daughter had vanished into the city, a maid, a nobody scrubbing floors for people who did not know her name. There was nothing to collect. A daughter who cleaned toilets in Queens was not worth the gas it would take to find her. Then the photograph had reached him. It had come through one of the channels a man like Desmond keeps open even when he is not using them, a former associate, a debt, a piece of gossip that traveled through the underworld the way all gossip travels, faster than truth and twice as eager. The most dangerous man in New York had married a maid, a girl from Queens, 25. And the photograph that traveled with the gossip showed the girl in a white dress in a garden, smiling, and Desmond Calloway had looked at that photograph for a long time, and he had recognized the small white scar on her neck, because he had put it there, and he had smiled. His daughter was worth something now. This was the thing Sera did not understand about her father, the thing she had spent her whole life not understanding, because understanding it would have required her to look directly at a truth too cold to hold. Her father had never hated her. Hatred would have been a kind of attention, a kind of relationship. Desmond Calloway had simply never seen his daughter as a person. He had seen her as an asset of fluctuating value, a thing whose worth went up and down according to what she could provide, and for 16 years her worth had been near zero. And now, suddenly, it was the highest it had ever been, because she was sleeping in the bed of a man worth $300 million, and a man worth $300 million will pay a great deal to keep his wife's childhood quiet. Desmond did not want a reunion. He did not want forgiveness or a relationship or a place at the table. He wanted what he had always wanted from everyone, which was leverage, applied steadily, until the thing gave way. He had found the weak point. The weak point was that Sera loved Vittorio, and that Vittorio loved her back, and that love, as Desmond understood it, was simply the largest lever a person could hand you. He had taught his daughter that lesson when she was 9 years old with a belt buckle. He intended to teach it to her again. For 2 weeks, Sera lived 2 lives. In the first life, she was Vittorio's wife. She drank espresso by the library window in the mornings and read her books in the chair Scipio grudgingly shared and ate dinner across from a man who had learned, late and clumsily, and with enormous effort, how to ask her about her day and listen to the answer. In the first life, she was happier than she had ever believed a person like her was permitted to be, and the happiness frightened her, because happiness was a thing with value, and anything with value could be taken. In the second life, she was a 9-year-old in the Bronx again. The second life happened in the spaces between the first. It happened when she found the second key, left this time on the windshield of the car Vittorio had bought her, a car she did not need and could not quite believe was hers. It happened when the phone in her pocket, a number known to perhaps 4 people, buzzed with a text from an unknown sender that said only a time and a place, a diner in Long Island City, 10 in the morning, Thursday. It happened in the cold that moved through her body every time another piece of evidence arrived that her father was real and close and patient, and had a plan. She went to the diner. Of course she went. She told Vittorio she was visiting a friend from her old building, and the lie came out smooth and complete, and she hated herself for how good she was at it, and she went anyway, because the alternative was telling him, and telling him meant bringing her father into the home she had built, and she would burn herself to the ground before she let her father's hand fall on anything she loved. The diner was the kind of place that had not changed its menu or its grease in 30 years. She sat in a booth by the window with her back to the wall, the way she always sat, the way he had taught her, and she watched the door, and at 10 exactly her father walked in. He was smaller than she remembered. That was the thing about monsters from childhood. They shrink. He was 63 now, gray, thin, his hands spotted with age but still quick, still a locksmith's hands, hands that knew how to find the one position in which a thing would yield. He wore a brown jacket that had been good once. He moved with the economy of a man who had spent his life conserving energy for the moments that mattered. He sat across from her in the booth and looked at her, and his face did the thing his face had always done, which was nothing, which was the absence of anything, the flatness she had inherited and built her own survival on, and seeing it on him was like looking into a mirror that showed her what she might have become if she had never gotten free. "You look well," Desmond said. "Marriage agrees with you. What do you want?" "Is that any way to talk to your father?" He picked up the laminated menu and studied it. "I'll have coffee. You should eat something. You were always too thin. Your mother never fed you right." "My mother fed me on what was left after you drank the rest." Desmond set the menu down. His eyes came up to hers, and there was the thing she remembered, the cold assessment, the weighing. "You've gotten sharp. The city does that. Or the man does that. Which is it? Tell me what you want and then leave, and don't come near me again." A waitress came. Desmond ordered coffee in a voice that was pleasant and ordinary, the voice he used for everyone who was not family, the voice that had fooled neighbors and teachers and social workers her whole childhood, the voice that made people say, "What a nice man, what a quiet man," when the nice, quiet man went home and became something else behind a locked door. The waitress left. Desmond folded his spotted hands on the table. "You married a wealthy man," he said. "A powerful man. I'm happy for you. A father wants to see his daughter provided for. You're not happy for me. You don't feel things. I figured that out when I was 12. You figured out a great many things. You were always clever, cleverer than your mother." He turned his coffee cup a quarter turn on its saucer, and the gesture went through Sera like a blade, because Vittorio turned his cup the same way, and she had loved that gesture on Vittorio, and now here it was on her father, and she understood for the first time that she had married a man who shared a habit with the monster who made her, and the understanding sat in her stomach like swallowed ice. "Here is what I want, Sera. It's very simple. I want a small consideration, a recognition of all the years I went without my daughter. Your husband has a great deal. I'm asking for a very little. Money. A father falls on hard times. A daughter helps. It's the natural order. And if I don't?" Desmond smiled. It was the smile she had spent her whole life learning to read, the smile that meant the evening was not going to be a quiet one. "And your husband learns who his wife really is," Desmond said. "Where she comes from, what kind of blood is in her. Men like that, men with empires, they like to believe they chose carefully. They like to believe their wife is a certain kind of person. It would be a shame for him to learn that he married into a family like ours. That the woman he trusts grew up the way you grew up, learned the things you learned, became the things you became. We're the same, you and I. He doesn't know that yet, but I could tell him. I could tell him a great many things." Sera sat very still. The diner clattered around her, plates and conversation and the hiss of the grill, and her father sat across from her with his coffee and his patience and his belief that he had found the weak point. And the worst part, the part that made her hands cold under the table, was that he was not entirely wrong. Not about the leverage, about the fear underneath it. Some buried 9-year-old part of her still believed that if Vittorio ever truly saw where she came from, if he ever understood that the calm he loved was built in the same forge as her father's cruelty, he would look at her differently. That the blood would show. That she would turn out to be, in the end, her father's daughter. It was a lie. She knew it was a lie. She had spent 3 years and 87 books and 1,000 nights alone in a 400-square-foot apartment learning that it was a lie. But her father had built that lie into her foundation when she was 9, and a thing built into a foundation does not come out because you have decided it is false. It comes out slowly, with help, in the light, the way Vittorio's lie was still coming out of him. And here was her father, with a trowel, trying to pack it back in. "How much?" she said. And she heard her own voice say it, and she knew, even as she said it, that she had just made the exact mistake Vittorio had made before, the mistake she had stood in a library and named as a betrayal, the mistake of managing the person you love instead of being honest with them. She was going to pay her father. She was going to keep this in the dark. She was going to handle it alone, and she was going to lie to Vittorio's face, and she was going to tell herself it was protection, and she was building the wall even as she swore she was tearing it down. 50,000, Desmond said, to start. To start. The 2 words a man like her father always added, because a man like her father never wanted a sum, he wanted a faucet, a thing he could return to and open again whenever his value calculation required it. "I'll get it," Sera said. "I knew you would. You were always a good girl, underneath." Desmond stood, leaving his coffee untouched, the way she now realized he had never intended to drink it. The coffee had only ever been a prop, a reason to sit, a piece of ordinary cover for a thing that was not ordinary at all. "Thursday next week. Same time, same booth. Come alone and Sera." He paused, buttoning his brown jacket. "If you tell him, I tell him first. And I make sure the version he hears is the one that ends with him wondering whether he can trust anything you've ever said to him. Think about that. A man like that. Once the trust cracks, it doesn't mend. You know that better than anyone. You watched it happen to him before." He walked out of the diner into the gold morning light, small and gray and patient, and Sera sat in the booth with 2 untouched coffees and a $50,000 demand and her father's old key in her pocket. And she understood that the door she thought Vittorio had unlocked forever had been quietly relocked, from the inside, by her own 2 hands. Getting $50,000 was the easy part, and that was its own kind of horror. Sera had access now. That was the thing about the life she had married into. She had never had money in her life, had counted coins for the bus, had eaten rice for 6 days because the 7th day was payday, and now she lived in a house where $50,000 was a number that could disappear without anyone noticing, an amount smaller than what Vittorio spent on the wine in the cellar, smaller than the security detail's monthly cost, a rounding error in an empire. She could have asked Vittorio for it, and he would have given it to her without a question, because he had told her on their wedding day that he trusted her with everything, with the room and the key and the name he had not said in 40 years, and he had meant it, and that was exactly why she could not ask. Because asking meant explaining, and explaining meant her father. So she did it the other way. She had spent 6 months learning the household, the accounts she had access to as the lady of the house, the petty cash and the operational funds, and the discretionary spending that ran a mansion, and she moved the money the way her father had taught her to move through a locked building, quietly, leaving no marks, taking the thing she came for and disappearing before anyone knew a thing was gone. She told herself it was not stealing because Vittorio would have given it to her anyway. She told herself a great many things. She met her father the following Thursday and slid an envelope across the cracked diner table, and he took it without counting it, because counting it would have suggested he doubted her, and a man like Desmond never showed doubt. Doubt was a crack, and cracks were for other people. He tucked the envelope into the brown jacket and turned his coffee cup a quarter turn and asked her about her husband, casual, pleasant, the way a torturer makes small talk, and Sera answered in monosyllables and watched the door and counted the seconds until she could leave. "Same time next month," Desmond said, when the seconds were finally up. "You said 50,000. "I said to start, weren't you listening?" He smiled the smile. "You're a smart girl, you knew what to start meant. Don't pretend you didn't. Pretending is beneath you. We don't pretend with each other. We're the same." "We're the same," he said it every time. It was the lever inside the lever, the thing underneath the money, the real demand, which was not for $50,000 but for her agreement, her acknowledgement, her surrender to the idea that she was his, made by him, the same as him, that everything she had built since she was 16 was a costume over the thing he had forged, and that she could put on the white dress and live in the mansion and call herself the lady of the house, but underneath, where it counted. She was Desmond Calloway's daughter, and always would be. That was what he was buying with the 50,000, not the money. The money was nothing to him. He was buying the slow re-establishment of the only relationship he had ever understood, the one where he found the weak point and pressed, and the thing gave way over and over on a schedule forever. Sera went home. She walked through the front door of the estate, past the security detail who nodded to her, past the foyer where she had once knelt with a $3 brush, up the stairs to the bedroom she shared with a man who loved her, and she went into the bathroom and locked the door and sat on the edge of the tub and shook, silently, with her hand pressed over her mouth, the way she had shaken as a child in a locked bathroom in the Bronx, and the symmetry of it, the bathroom then and the bathroom now, broke something in her that she had believed was already broken past breaking. She was 9 years old again. She had married the most dangerous man in New York, and she had her own car and her own bank access, and a library full of books and a cat named after a Roman general, and none of it mattered, because her father had reached across 16 years and put his hand back on the controls, and she had let him, and she was lying to the one person who had ever made her feel safe, and she could not stop, because stopping meant choosing between two terrors. And she had been taught from the age of 9 that when you are caught between two terrors you do not choose, you endure, you go still, you wait for the storm to pass. But the storm was not going to pass. That was the thing about her father. He was not a storm. A storm ends. He was a faucet, and faucets do not end. They only run until someone shuts them off, and the only person who had ever been able to shut Desmond Calloway off was the woman who had taken a suitcase and $400 and walked out, and she was dead, and there was no one left to do it. Except there was. There was a man downstairs who had shut off worse than Desmond Calloway. A man who had broken his own father, who had walked into a sunroom and dismantled the monster who made him without raising his voice. A man with an empire and a security detail, and 40 years of knowing how to make a problem disappear. All she had to do was tell him. And she could not, because telling him meant her father's voice in her head, the version he would tell first, the version that ended with Vittorio looking at her the way she had spent her whole life dreading to be looked at. And it meant something worse, something she could barely hold even now, locked in a bathroom with her hand over her mouth. It meant admitting that she, who had diagnosed Vittorio so cleanly, who had stood in a library and named his exact disease, had the same disease herself. That she was doing the same thing. That all her clarity about him had been a way of not looking at herself. That the woman who told Vittorio, "Let me in," all the way in, had a locked room of her own, and a key around her own neck, and a monster of her own behind the door, and had been lying about it since the night they sat on the garden bench and she saw a light on the wall and said it was nothing. Vittorio knew something was wrong within the first week. He had not survived 60 years by being unobservant, and he had not spent 6 months loving Sera by ignoring her. He knew her now the way she had once known him, from the periphery, reading the small shifts. He knew that she had started sleeping badly again, that the steadiness in her face had developed a brittleness at the edges, that she flinched, very slightly, almost invisibly, when her phone buzzed. A flinch she suppressed so fast that anyone who had not spent 40 years reading micro-expressions across negotiating tables would have missed it. He knew she was lying to him. He did not know about what. He did what he had learned not to do and then did it anyway, because old habits are the hardest doors to lock. He had her watched. Not out of suspicion of betrayal, the way his father would have watched, but out of fear. The specific fear of a man who had loved exactly one other woman in his life and had lost her to a violence he did not see coming. He told himself he was protecting her. He told himself a great many things. He did not see the irony, that he was doing to Sera precisely what she was doing to him, that they were two people who had found each other across a chasm of inherited damage, and were now, in their terror of losing what they had found, recreating the exact dynamic that had nearly destroyed them once before, each managing the other, each in the dark, each certain that secrecy was a form of love. The detail he assigned was small and discreet. 2 men. They reported that Mrs. Selvaggio had visited a diner in Long Island City twice, that she had met an older man, gray, thin, 60s, that the meetings were brief. That money had changed hands at the second one, an envelope passed across the table. Vittorio read the report in his study with the door closed, and the cold that moved through him was a cold he recognized, the cold of the worst conclusions, the cold of a man whose mind had been trained by 40 years in a world of betrayal to assume the most dangerous explanation first. An older man, money, secret meetings. His wife, 25, beautiful, married to a man of 60, slipping away to meet someone in a diner in Queens and handing him envelopes of cash. The conclusion assembled itself, ugly and complete, and Vittorio sat with it. And for one terrible hour he believed it, because believing the worst was the reflex his father had built into him, the same way her father had built the lie into Sera. 2 children raised by monsters, each given a foundation of poison, each meeting in adulthood and falling in love and discovering, now, that the poison had not gone anywhere, that it had only been waiting. He believed his wife was betraying him, with another man. He believed it for 1 hour, and in that hour he became, again, the man he had been before Sera, cold and certain and dangerous, and he made a phone call, and he gave an order, and the order was to find out who the older man was, and to bring him in, and the word he used was the word he used for the longer conversations. Then he hung up the phone, and he looked at the photograph of Gianna on the mantel across the room, the young woman in the white dress smiling at a boy who did not know what was coming, and something in the photograph stopped him. Because Gianna had been 20 when his father killed her, and his father had killed her to teach him a lesson about trust, about leverage, about how the people you love are weapons that can be turned against you. And the entire architecture of Vittorio's life had been built on that lesson. The locked room, the 40 years alone, the reflex to believe the worst, and Sera had walked into his house and shown him that the lesson was wrong, that his father had not taught him that love was dangerous. His father had taught him that his father was willing to do monstrous things to keep him obedient. And here he was, an hour into believing the worst about the only person who had ever told him the truth, about to do the thing his father did, about to treat the person he loved as a problem to be managed by force, about to send men to a diner in Queens the way his father had sent men to a small apartment in 1986. He put the phone down. He made a second call and he countermanded the first order. He said, "Do not touch the man." He said, "Watch only." He said, "I want to know who he is, but no one moves on him, no one speaks to him until I say so." And then he sat in his study and did the hardest thing a man like Vittorio Selvaggio had ever been asked to do, harder than breaking his father, harder than unlocking the room. He decided to ask his wife, directly, with words, and to believe her answer. He found her in the library that night. She was in the reading chair by the window, the one Scipio had claimed, and the cat was in her lap, and she had a book open, but she was not reading it. She was looking at the dark glass where the garden lights made small points of brightness, and Vittorio stood in the doorway and looked at her, his wife, the woman who had walked into his fortress and turned it into a home, and he saw, now that he was looking with the right eyes, that she was not the woman who had betrayed him. She was a woman who was terrified. He knew the difference. He had spent his whole life around both. "Sera," he said. She looked up. She arranged her face into the steadiness, the old armor, and Vittorio watched her do it, and his chest ached, because he knew that armor, he had worn that armor, he had worn it for 40 years until she taught him to take it off. "You're back," she said. "How was the meeting?" There was no meeting. He came into the room and sat in the armchair across from her, the chair he sat in during the mornings, and he set his hands on his knees, and he looked at her. "I've been having you followed." The book closed in her lap. Scipio, sensing the shift, jumped down and stalked out of the room with the offended dignity of a cat who does not wish to be present for human difficulty. "You what?" Sera said. "For a week, 2 men. I told myself it was for your protection. It wasn't. It was fear, the same fear that made me lie to you about my father being alive. I did the thing I swore I'd never do again. I'm telling you now because I'd rather you hear it from me than find out, because I know what finding out does. You taught me what finding out does." He paused. "They told me you've been meeting a man in a diner, that you gave him money." Sera's face did something he had never seen it do. It crumpled, just for a second, the armor failing completely, the 9-year-old surfacing through the 25-year-old, and then she pulled it back, but he had seen it, and they both knew he had seen it. "For an hour today," Vittorio said, "I believed the worst. I believed you were leaving me, with him. I became the man I used to be. I made a phone call I'm not proud of. And then I looked at Gianna's photograph and I understood what I was doing and I stopped. Because you didn't leave me when I lied to you. You stayed, and you made me tell the truth, and you saved my life doing it. So I'm going to do for you what you did for me. I'm going to ask you once, with no men and no force and no assumptions. Who is the man in the diner? And whatever the answer is, I'm going to believe you, and I'm going to stand with you, the way you stood with me." Sera looked at him across the small space between the 2 chairs, the space where they had spent 100 mornings, and the armor was gone now, all of it. And what was underneath was the thing she had spent her entire life hiding, the raw and unguarded center of her, the part her father had taught her to bury at 9, and that Vittorio, now, was asking her to bring into the light. "His name is Desmond Calloway," she said. Her voice was not steady. For the first time since he had known her, her voice was not steady, and the unsteadiness was the most honest sound he had ever heard her make. "He's my father." The room went very quiet. "He's not dead," Sera said. "I told you I didn't know where he was. I lied. I didn't know then, but he found me. He saw the wedding photograph. It traveled. And he came back because now I'm worth something, because you're worth something. He wants money. He wants it on a schedule forever, the way he always wanted everything. And if I don't pay, he's going to tell you who I really am, where I come from, what I was made into. He's going to tell you that I'm the same as him, that the calm you love is the same calm he has, built in the same way, and that underneath the dress and the books and the cat I'm just Desmond Calloway's daughter." Her hands were shaking in her lap now, openly, no longer hidden. "And the worst part, Vittorio, the worst part is that I believed him. Some part of me believed that if you ever really saw it, you'd look at me the way I've spent my whole life dreading. So I paid him. I took the money from the household accounts, and I paid him, and I lied to your face, exactly the way you lied to mine, and I told myself it was to protect you, and it wasn't. It was because I was afraid. I diagnosed you so perfectly, and I couldn't see that I have the same disease. I have a locked room, too. I've had it the whole time, and I just made you stand outside it the way I refused to stand outside yours. She stopped. She had run out of words, or out of breath, or out of the strength it took to keep saying true things after a lifetime of saying safe ones, and she sat in the chair with her hands shaking and her face open, and she waited for Vittorio to look at her the way her father had promised he would. He did not. He got up from the armchair. He crossed the small space, and he knelt down in front of her chair, this man of 60. This man who knelt for no one, who had made senators and rival bosses and federal prosecutors come to him, and he took her shaking hands in his, and he held them still the way she had once held his face, still in this same room, from underneath, like a foundation. "Listen to me," Vittorio said. "Look at me and listen. You are not the same as him, I know the same. I was raised by the same. My father and your father are the same animal, and you and I are the children they tried to make in their image, and we both have the locked rooms and the buried things and the reflex to manage instead of trust. That's not a disease you caught from him. That's a wound he gave you. The same wound mine gave me, and a wound is not the same as the man who made it. You told me that. In this room, you told me my father didn't teach me love was weakness. He taught me he was willing to murder to keep me obedient. Those are different lessons. Your father didn't make you into him. He hurt you, and you survived, and surviving made you the most honest person I have ever met, even when the honesty came late, even when it came through tears, even when it came after a lie. The lie doesn't make you him. The fact that you're sitting here telling me the truth, that makes you the opposite of him. He would never. He's incapable. You are sitting in a chair telling your husband the worst thing you know about yourself, and that is the bravest thing I have ever watched a person do, and I have watched brave people die. Sera's tears came then, finally, the tears she had held since the diner, since the bathroom, since the garden bench, since she was 9 years old in the Bronx learning that crying was a target. They came, and Vittorio knelt in front of her and held her shaking hands and did not tell her to stop, did not flinch, did not look away, because he had learned from her that the thing you do when someone you love finally breaks is not to fix it. It is to stay, to be present, to be a witness, to make the breaking safe by refusing to leave the room. "I'm sorry," Sera said. "I'm sorry I lied. I'm sorry I paid him. I'm sorry I did the exact thing I told you was a betrayal." "You did it for the same reason I did it," Vittorio said. "Fear of losing the only good thing. We're going to have to get better at this. The not lying, both of us. We were both raised by men who taught us that the truth is a weapon you hand your enemy. It's going to take time to unlearn." He brought her hands to his mouth and pressed his lips against her knuckles, the same knuckles that had gripped a bag strap right the night she first told him about her father. "But we unlearn it together. That was the deal." "All the way in, that goes both directions. You stood outside my locked room and refused to let me keep it locked. Now I'm standing outside yours. Open it. Let me in. The father, the diner, the money, all of it. And then we decide what to do about Desmond Calloway." "What do we do about him?" Something moved in Vittorio's face, not the warmth that had been there a moment ago. The other thing. The thing Gregor Petrov had seen across a table on Mulberry. The thing that had no hesitation in it. "That depends," Vittorio said, "on what you want. He's your father. He's your wound. The last time it was my monster, and you let me decide how it ended. You stood beside me and let me be the one to face him. This is your monster. So I'm going to ask you what no one ever asked you when you were 9 years old, when you had no power and no choices and no one to stand with you. What do you want to happen to the man who put that scar on your neck?" Sera looked at her husband kneeling in front of her, this dangerous old man who had just handed her the one thing her father had spent her whole life teaching her she would never have, which was a choice, and power, and someone standing beside her instead of looming over her. And she understood that the question itself was the gift. That being asked what she wanted was a thing that had never happened to her, that her entire life had been other people deciding and her enduring. And here was Vittorio Selvaggio, who could make Desmond Calloway disappear with a phone call, asking her first what she wanted. "I don't want him dead," she said slowly, finding the answer as she spoke it. "That's what he'd do. If our positions were reversed, he'd just erase the problem. I don't want to be him. I don't want to win by becoming the thing he made." She wiped her face with the back of her hand. "I want him to lose. I want him to stand in front of me with no leverage and no power and nothing to spin on his finger. And I want him to understand that the girl he scarred grew up and got free and built a life he can't touch. I want what you got in that sunroom, not his death, his defeat. I want to take the one thing he has, the only thing he's ever had, which is the belief that he can always find the weak point and press. I want to show him there's no weak point left." Vittorio looked at her for a long moment. Then he stood, and he drew her up out of the chair, and he held her against him, and over the top of her head he looked at the photograph of Gianna on the mantel, and something passed between the living man and the dead girl, some understanding, some completion. "Then that's what we'll do," Vittorio said. "We take his leverage, we take all of it, and we do it together." Taking Desmond Calloway's leverage required understanding what the leverage actually was, and that understanding came in pieces over the following week. In conversations Sera had never been able to have with anyone, because the only person who shared the history was dead, and she had spent 3 years building a life that required telling no one. Now she told Vittorio everything, not in one sitting. In the mornings, by the window, with the espresso, the way they had built every important thing between them. She told him about the locked bathroom and the belt buckle and the key spinning on his finger at the dinner table. She told him about the calculus of stillness, how she had learned to read the air in a room the way sailors read weather, how she could tell from the sound of his footsteps in the hall whether to be visible or invisible. She told him about her mother, who had absorbed the worst of it for years to keep it off her daughter, who had finally found the courage to leave when Sera was 16, who had worked herself into a hospital bed and died with her daughter holding her hand and her last words being, "I'm sorry, I didn't do it sooner." And she told him the thing she had never told anyone, the thing underneath all the other things, which was that the worst damage her father had done was not the scar on her neck. The worst damage was the lie he had planted, the belief that she was the same as him, that his cruelty was in her blood, that the stillness and the control and the ability to read people were not survival skills, but inheritance, proof that she was his, that she would become him, that everything good she built would eventually rot because the root was rotten. "That's the lever," Vittorio said when she finished. They were in the library. The morning light was on her face. "Not the money was never the point. The point is the lie. He keeps you paying because as long as you're paying, you're agreeing with him. You're agreeing that the thing he might tell me is shameful. You're agreeing that you're his. Every envelope is a confession. He's not extorting money. He's extracting the same surrender he took when you were 9. "Yes," Sera said. "That's exactly it. How did you?" "Because my father did the same thing with different tools. He didn't want money from me. He had money. He wanted obedience. Every order I followed was an agreement that he was right about the world, that love is weakness, that the family is everything, that I was his creation. Breaking him didn't mean killing him. It meant standing in front of him and refusing to agree. The moment I told him his lesson was wrong, in front of witnesses, with you beside me, he had nothing left, because the only thing he ever had was my agreement, and I took it away." Vittorio leaned forward. "Your father's leverage is your shame, so we take away the shame. We make the thing he threatens to reveal into a thing you reveal yourself, on your terms, with no fear attached. A secret only has power as long as you're afraid of it coming out. The day you stop being afraid, the secret is just a fact, and a fact can't be sold." Sera understood. It was the same logic that had freed Vittorio. The locked room only had power while it was locked. Gianna's photograph only carried shame while it hid behind a door, and the day Sera convinced him to put it on the mantel, in the light, it stopped being shame and became grief, and grief is survivable. Grief is a thing you carry in the open, but shame is a thing that eats you in the dark. Her father was selling her the dark. The way to defeat him was to turn on the light. "He thinks the worst thing in the world is for you to know where I come from," Sera said slowly. "So the answer is that you already know. He thinks his weapon is the truth about my childhood, but you know the truth. You've known it since the night I told you about the belt buckle. There's nothing for him to reveal. The gun isn't loaded. The gun was never loaded, Vittorio said. You loaded it yourself with your own fear. That's not a criticism. I did the same thing for 40 years. We arm the men who hurt us by being afraid of what they know. We hand them the weapon and then we pay them not to use it. The whole transaction runs on our fear. The day the fear stops, the transaction stops. But there was a complication, and they both knew it. And Vittorio named it because they had agreed, now, that numbing things was how they were going to live. He won't stop at the truth about your past, Vittorio said. Men like your father, men like mine, when you take away their leverage, they don't accept the loss. They escalate. The moment Desmond Calloway understands that the shame doesn't work anymore, that you're not afraid of what he knows, he'll reach for the only thing he has left. And the only thing he'll have left is harm. Direct harm. To you, or to me, or to something we love. A man who can't control you with fear will try to control you with damage. We need to be ready for that. Because the meeting where you stop paying him is the meeting where he stops being a blackmailer and becomes something more dangerous. Sera looked at the photograph of Gianna on the mantel. You think it hurt me, she said. I think he hurt you for 16 years for no profit at all, Vittorio said. I think a man who scars a 9-year-old over a look at the dinner table is a man who hurts because hurting is what he is, and the money was only ever a story he told himself about why. So yes, I think when the money stops, the man underneath the money comes out. And I think we need to make very sure that when he comes out somewhere we control, on ground we've chosen, with everything in place. The way I handled Gregor, the way I handled my father, you don't meet a predator on his ground, you make him come to yours. The plan they built was patient and cold and entirely Vittorio's expertise. The thing he was best at in the world, the architecture of a controlled confrontation. But the shape of it, the goal of it, the moral center of it, was Sera's, because it was her monster, and she had decided what defeating him meant, and Vittorio had given her his entire dangerous apparatus and asked only that she point it. She would meet her father one more time, not in his diner, on the estate, in the home he had been circling, the home he believed was a vault he could crack. He thought he was being invited in to negotiate a larger payment. He was being invited in so that the confrontation could happen on ground that belonged to Sera, surrounded by everything she had built, with Vittorio present, with the security detail present, with the entire weight of the life her father believed he could threaten a raid around her as proof that the weak point he had spent his life searching for did not exist. She would tell him to his face that the payments were over, that there was no secret left to sell because she had already told her husband everything, that the shame he had planted in her at 9 had been dug out and held up to the light and named for what it was, a wound, not an inheritance. And she would watch him reach for escalation because Vittorio was certain he would, and when he reached for it, the apparatus would be ready. There's one more thing, Vittorio said the night before. They were in bed, the lights off, the estate quiet, Scipio a warm weight at the foot of the bed. I need you to be sure about the not dead part, because I want to be honest with you about what I am. I have spent 40 years solving problems like your father permanently. It's the easiest thing in the world for me. One phone call and Desmond Calloway is a man who went for a walk and didn't come back, and no one ever looks, because no one ever looked out for you when it mattered, and that same invisibility cuts both ways now. I could give you that. Some part of me wants to give you that because I've seen the scar, and there is a thing in me that wants the man who made it to stop existing. He was quiet for a moment. But you said you don't want to become him. And I think that's the wisest thing either of us has ever said. So I'm asking you to be sure. Because once we're in the room, if he escalates, things can happen fast, and I need to know your line before we cross the threshold, not after. Sera lay in the dark beside her husband and thought about it honestly, the way they had promised to do everything now. If he tries to hurt me, she said, if he puts his hands on me or on you, then your men do what your men do, and I won't lose a single night of sleep, because that's not murder. That's the thing that should have happened 100 times when I was small and no one came. But I won't have him killed for being who he is. I won't have him killed because I'm afraid or because it's easier or because erasing him erases the history. I want him alive and defeated and aware. I want him to spend whatever years he has left knowing that the daughter he tried to make in his image got free and built something he could never touch and looked him in the eye and felt nothing. Not hatred. Nothing. The way he always looked at me. I want to give him back exactly what he gave me. Indifference. That's worse than death for a man like him. Death is fast. Indifference is the rest of his life. Vittorio turned in the dark and found her face with his hand, the way she had once found his in a kitchen full of fluorescent light. "You're a remarkable woman, Sera Selvaggio," he said. "I had a good teacher," she said. "Recent, 60 years old, very slow learner at first, but he came around." In the dark, she felt him smile against her palm. Desmond Calloway arrived at the estate on a Thursday. The way he arrived everywhere, patient and unhurried. A small gray man in a brown jacket walking up a driveway that cost more than every place he had ever lived combined. He had agreed to come to the house because Sera had told him the next payment would be larger, much larger, but that she could not keep moving money out of the accounts without her husband noticing, and that there was a safe in the house, a private safe, and that if he came on Thursday when her husband was away on business, she could give him a sum that would mean he never needed to come back. Desmond had not believed the part about never needing to come back, because faucets do not turn themselves off, but he had believed the part about the larger sum, because greed was the engine he ran on, and greed believed what it wanted to believe. He had also believed it because it fit his understanding of his daughter. A frightened girl, managing a crisis, trying to make the problem go away with money the way frightened people always try to make problems go away. He had spent her whole childhood watching her manage, watching her go still and quiet and try to keep the peace, and he assumed, walking up the driveway, that he was about to collect from the same frightened girl he had always known, grown up now, dressed better, but underneath, where it counted, the same. He did not know that the girl had spent the week telling her husband everything. He did not know that the shame he had come to collect against had already been dissolved in the light of 100 honest mornings. He did not know that he was not walking into a vault he could crack, but onto ground that had been chosen for him, the way Vittorio chose the table, the way a man who has survived 40 years arranges every variable before the other party arrives. The security detail let him through the gate. They had been told to. They watched him with the flat professional attention of men who had been given a name and a face and an instruction. And Desmond, who read rooms for a living, felt the attention and misread it, because his whole life had taught him that attention meant fear, that people watched powerful men out of fear, and he assumed the men were Sera's husband's men, and that they did not know who he was, when in fact they knew exactly who he was, and the attention was not fear. It was the patience of a trap that has already closed and is simply waiting for the animal to notice. Sera met him in the foyer where she had once knelt with a $3 brush. The white marble she had scrubbed on her hands and knees the first day, before any of it, before the coffee cup game and the locked room and the kitchen kiss and the sun room and the wedding. She stood in the center of that marble now in a simple dress, her hands at her sides, her face composed, and she watched her father walk in out of the June afternoon, and she felt the thing she had not expected to feel, which was calm. Real calm, not the armor. The thing the armor had always been imitating, the genuine article. "Quite a house," Desmond said. He turned a slow circle in the foyer, taking it in, the marble, the staircase, the chandelier, appraising it the way he appraised everything, calculating its value, calculating his percentage. "You did well for yourself, Sera, better than your mother ever managed. She'd be proud, or jealous, hard to say with her." "Don't talk about my mother." "Touchy," he smiled. "Where's the safe?" "There's no safe." The smile held, but something behind it adjusted. Desmond Calloway had spent his life reading the moment a situation changed, and he read it now, the way the air in the foyer had shifted, the way his daughter was standing, the way she had said there's no safe not with fear, but with something flat and final. "What is this?" he said. "This is the last time we talk," Sera said. "I asked you here to tell you something in person on my ground in my house. The payments are over. There won't be another one. Not next month, not ever." Desmond's eyes moved, quick, cataloging the exits, the foyer, the staircase, the door behind him. The locksmith's instinct, always looking for the way out, the weak point, the position in which the thing would yield. "You're making a mistake. We talked about what happens if you stop. Your husband learns what you are, where you come from. I'll tell him things that'll make him look at you for the rest of your life wondering. He already knows. The words landed in the marble foyer, and for the first time in Sera's memory, in her entire life, she watched something she had never once seen on her father's face. She watched him lose his footing. He knows everything, Sera said. He's known for months, the belt buckle, the bathroom, the key you used to spin at the dinner table, the way you taught me to go still so you couldn't see me flinch. I told him all of it, every piece in the morning by a window with coffee, the way two people who trust each other talk about the things that hurt them. There's nothing left for you to reveal. The thing you came to sell, he already owns. You've been extorting me with a secret that stopped being a secret a long time ago. She took a step toward him, across the marble she had once scrubbed. You taught me that the worst thing in the world was for anyone to know where I came from. You built that into me when I was 9. And I believed it for 25 years. I paid you because I believed it. And then I told my husband the truth, out loud in the light, and you know what happened? Nothing. He didn't look at me the way you promised. He knelt down and held my hands, because the thing you spent my whole life telling me was shameful turned out to be just a wound. Your wound. The one you gave me. And a wound in the light stops being shame. It becomes a scar. And a scar is just proof that you survived the thing that tried to kill you. Desmond stood in the foyer, small and gray, and Sera watched the calculation run behind his eyes, watched him search for the lever, for the weak point, for the position in which she would still yield, and watched him find nothing, because there was nothing, because she had spent a week in the light with a man who loved her, dissolving the exact thing her father had come to press. And then she watched him reach for the only thing he had left. It happened fast, the way Vittorio had said it would. Desmond Calloway had spent his life as a man who found the weak point and applied pressure, and when the psychological weak point disappeared, he reached, with a speed that betrayed how close to the surface it had always been, for the physical one. His hand went into the brown jacket, into the inside pocket, and it came out with a small flat pistol, old, well-kept, a locksmith's care applied to a different kind of mechanism, and he raised it not at Sera but past her, toward the staircase, because Desmond was not stupid. Desmond had felt the security detail and understood the house was full of men, and a hostage was leverage, and leverage was the only language he had ever spoken, and his daughter. Standing 10 feet away with no fear in her face, was about to become the leverage that would buy him out of the trap he had finally understood he was in. He never finished raising it. The thing about choosing your ground, the thing Vittorio had learned in 40 years of arranging tables and rooms and confrontations, was that on your own ground, you control the variables the other party cannot see. Desmond had catalogued the exits. He had not catalogued the gallery above the foyer, the landing at the top of the staircase, where a man had been standing in the shadow for the entire conversation. A man from the security detail, positioned before Desmond ever walked through the gate, with a clear line down into the foyer, with instructions that were precise and patient, and had been waiting, like the trap, for the animal to make the move everyone knew it would make. There was no gunshot from Desmond's pistol. There was a single shot from above, placed not to kill but to disarm, into the shoulder of the arm that held the gun, because Sera had been clear about her line, alive and defeated, not dead, and Vittorio had relayed the line to his men with the exactitude of a man who had finally learned that what his wife wanted was the only law in the room. Desmond Calloway cried out, a small, ugly sound, and the pistol clattered onto the white marble, the marble Sera had scrubbed on her first day, and the small gray man went down to one knee with his hand pressed to his shoulder and red coming through his fingers, and he looked up, and the calm in his face was gone, all of it, and what was underneath was the thing he had spent his whole life making other people feel. He was afraid. Vittorio came down the staircase. He had been in the house the whole time, of course. The story about being away on business had been the bait, the thing that brought Desmond up the driveway believing he was walking into an unguarded vault. Vittorio descended the stairs the way he did everything, without hurry, his hand trailing the banister, and he crossed the foyer and stood beside his wife. And he looked down at the man who had scarred her at 9, the man who had come back to finish what he started, and Vittorio's face was the face Gregor Petrov had seen, the face with no hesitation in it. "You must be Desmond," Vittorio said. "I've heard a great deal about you. None of it from your daughter directly, you understand, she's too dignified to spend her words on you. But I've assembled a picture. The belt buckle, the key, the 16 years. I've spent my life around men like you. My own father was one, so I want you to understand that I know exactly what you are, and I am not impressed, and I am not afraid, and there is nothing about you that is new to me." Desmond looked up at him, at the most dangerous man in New York, and the locksmith's instinct, the lifelong search for the weak point, kicked in even now, even on his knees with a hole in his shoulder, and he tried to find Vittorio's lever the way he found everyone's. "She's using you," Desmond said through the pain. "Whatever she's told you, she's a survivor, my daughter. She does whatever it takes. She learned it from me. She'll turn on you the day it serves her the same way she's turned on me. You think you know her. You don't. There's a coldness in her. I put it there. It doesn't go away. One day you'll see it pointed at you, and you'll remember I warned you." And this was the moment, the real climax, the moment the entire story had been building toward, because it was the moment Desmond Calloway reached for the deepest lever, the lie he had built into his daughter's foundation, the belief that her survival instincts made her the same as him, that the coldness was his and would turn on everyone eventually. It was the lie that had kept Sera paying. It was the lie that had kept her silent. It was the master key, the one that had opened every door in her for 25 years. And Vittorio, who understood leverage better than any man alive, who had built his life on it and then learned from Sera how to dismantle it, looked down at Desmond Calloway and refused the lie completely, in front of his wife, the way Sera had once refused his father's lie in a sunroom. "You're wrong," Vittorio said, "and I'm going to tell you exactly how you're wrong, because I think it's the one thing in the world you've never understood, and I want you to carry it for whatever years you have left. You think the stillness is yours. You think the control, the way she reads a room. The way she survives, you think you put that in her and that makes her yours. But you didn't put it in her. You put the danger in the room and she built the stillness to survive it. The skill is hers. She made it. Out of necessity, in a house with a monster, a 9-year-old built the tools to stay alive, and those tools are the most extraordinary thing I have ever seen in a human being, and they have nothing to do with you. A locksmith's daughter learns to read locks. That doesn't make her a lock. You confuse the survival with the predator. She is not cold. I have watched her weep. I have watched her terrified. I have watched her love so carefully and so completely that it remade a man who spent 40 years believing he was incapable of being loved. That is not coldness. That is the opposite. The coldness you saw was a wall she built to keep your fist out. And the proof that the wall is not who she is, Desmond, the final proof, is that she took it down. For me, she showed me everything underneath it. And what's underneath it is the warmest, bravest, most honest person I have ever known. You never saw that because you only ever saw the wall. You spent 16 years staring at the wall she built to survive you, and you called it her face. You never met your daughter. You only ever met her defenses. And now you never will, because she's about to walk out of this room, and you are never going to see her again, and you are going to spend the rest of your life knowing that the most remarkable person you ever helped create grew up and got free and looked at you and felt nothing at all. Desmond Calloway, on his knees on the white marble, bleeding from the shoulder, opened his mouth to find the lever, the weak point, the thing that would still yield. And for the first time in his life, he found nothing, because there was nothing. Because the man standing over him had just dismantled, in the space of a single speech, the lie that Desmond had spent 25 years, and a belt buckle, and 16 years of cruelty building into his daughter, and the dismantling was complete and surgical and final. And Desmond understood, kneeling there, that he had lost the only game he had ever known how to play, the finding of weak points, because the two people standing over him had no weak points left. They had found each other and shown each other everything, and there was no lever in the world that could move people who had already surrendered their secrets to each other in the light. Sera stepped forward. She stood over her father, the man who had loomed over her for the first 16 years of her life, and now the geometry was reversed. She was standing and he was on his knees, and she looked down at him the way he had looked down at her 1,000 times, and she searched herself for the thing she had always expected to feel in this moment, the rage, the grief, the fear, the old child terror. And she felt the things she had told Vittorio she wanted to feel. She felt nothing, not hatred, not love, not fear. The clean, flat nothing he had always shown her returned to him now, in full, the only inheritance she would accept from Desmond Calloway, given back. "My men are going to take you to a hospital," she said, and the word might came out of her without thought because it was true now. They were her men too. This was her house. This was her life, and the man on the floor was the intruder. "Quietly. You'll be treated, and then you'll be released far from here with a clear understanding that has been made very clear to the people who matter. You will never contact me again. You will never speak my name again. You will never come within 100 miles of this house, or my husband, or anything I love. If you do, my husband will stop being patient, and you have seen today what my husband's patience looks like, and I promise you that you do not want to see what's underneath it." She crouched down, so her eyes were level with his, the way an adult crouches to speak to a child, the reversal complete. "You didn't make me. You hurt me, and I survived you. And then I built a life so far beyond anything you could imagine that you had to invent a story about coldness just to feel like you still had a claim on it. You don't. You never did. The scar on my neck is the last thing of yours I'll ever carry, and I'm going to carry it in the light, where everyone can see it, as proof that I lived through you. Goodbye, Desmond." She stood. She turned her back on him, the thing she had never been able to do as a child, the thing that had been impossible for 16 years, turning her back on her father in a room, and she walked to Vittorio and took his hand, and the two of them walked toward the staircase. And behind them the security detail moved in, professional and quiet, to collect the small gray man bleeding on the white marble, and Sera did not look back, because looking back was for prey, and she was not prey anymore. She had never been prey. She had only ever been a survivor who had finally stopped being asked to survive. The aftermath was quieter than the first time had been, because there was no Enzo-shaped hole this time, no 26-year betrayal to grieve, only a wound finally closed, a faucet finally shut off, a door finally, truly locked, this time from the right side. Desmond Calloway was treated at a private facility and released, 3 states away, with an understanding communicated to him by men who did not need to raise their voices. He understood. Men like Desmond always understood force. It was the one language they were fluent in, and the message had been delivered in that language with perfect clarity. The $50,000 Sera had taken from the household accounts, she told Vittorio about, every cent, in the light, because they had agreed that the lying was over, and the agreement went both directions. Vittorio had laughed, the rare warm laugh she had taught him to find, and told her that she had moved the money so cleanly that his own people hadn't caught it, and that if she ever wanted a job in the legitimate side of the business, the forensic accounting department could use someone with her instincts. She had told him the instincts were a locksmith's daughter's instincts, learned in a house she had survived, and that she intended to use them only ever in the light from now on, and only ever for him. The scar on her neck she stopped hiding. She had spent her whole life angling her hair to cover it, turning her head, 1,000 small adjustments she made without thinking, the way Vittorio had kept his coffee cup ritual, the small compulsions that damaged people develop to manage the unmanageable. She stopped. She wore her hair up. She let the thin white line show, in the light, at dinner, in the garden, the way Gianna's photograph showed on the mantel, a thing carried in the open instead of a secret kept in the dark. One evening, weeks after, they were on the stone bench in the garden again, the same bench where this all began, where she had seen the light on the wall and lied, and said it was nothing. The roses were past their June peak now, heavy and full, and Manhattan glowed on the southern horizon the way it always did, indifferent and bright. Scipio prowled the rose beds hunting things that were not there. Vittorio had a glass of wine he was not drinking, and Sera had her head on his shoulder, and the key, Vittorio's key, the brass key to the room that was now her library, hung on a chain around her neck, where he had placed it on their wedding night, where it had stayed. "Can I ask you something?" Sera said. "You've been asking me things for months. One more won't change the pattern." She smiled against his shoulder, because it was her line, the thing she had said to him in the library a lifetime ago, returned to her now, the way they returned things to each other. Gestures and phrases and small mercies passed back and forth until it was impossible to tell whose they had originally been. "When you were standing over him," she said. "When you took apart his lie about me being cold. The thing about me building the stillness to survive the danger he put in the room. How did you know to say that? I'd never told you that part. I didn't even know that part, not in words, until I heard you say it." Vittorio was quiet for a moment, looking out at the city. "Because it's my story too," he said. "My father put the danger in my room, and I built the same walls you built. The stillness, the control, the reflex to feel nothing. And for 40 years I thought the walls were me. I thought I was cold. I thought my father had made me into a man who couldn't love, and I believed it so completely that I locked a dead woman behind a door for 40 years rather than test it. And then you walked into my house, and you didn't flinch, and somewhere in those 6 months, I figured out that the coldness was never me. It was the wall. And the proof was that you got past it. The proof was that the wall came down the moment someone refused to be afraid of me. So when your father said you were cold, I knew exactly what he was doing, because I'd done it to myself for 40 years. I knew the difference between a person and the wall they built to survive, because I'd spent my whole life mistaking my own wall for my own face. I didn't learn that about you. I learned it about me. And then I just gave it back to you, because you gave it to me first, that night in the hallway, when you told me my father didn't teach me love was weakness." Sera lifted her head from his shoulder and looked at him, this dangerous old man who had been a locked room for 40 years and had let her unlock him, who had then, in turn, helped her unlock herself, the two of them passing the same key back and forth across the chasm of everything that had been done to them. "We're the same," she said. And then, because the words were the words her father had used, the lever he had pressed, she said them again on purpose, reclaiming them, the way she had reclaimed the scar and the stillness and the turning of her back. Not the way he meant it. He said it to own me. I'm saying it to choose you. We were made by the same kind of monster, in the same kind of dark, and we came out with the same walls, and we're the only two people in the world who could possibly understand what it cost the other one to take the walls down. That's not a coincidence. That's not even luck. That's two people who survived the same thing, finding each other and recognizing, across a marble foyer, somebody who speaks the language. We're the same, Vittorio, and it's the best thing that ever happened to me." Vittorio reached up and touched the small white scar on her neck, the one she no longer hid, his thumb tracing it the way she had once traced his cheekbone in a kitchen full of fluorescent light. "The first time I saw this," he said, "the first day when you were scrubbing the foyer floor and you didn't look up, I saw this scar and I knew, before I knew anything else about you, that you'd survived something. I didn't ask. I'd spent 40 years building a house where no one asked. But I saw it, and something in me recognized something in you before either of us understood what we were looking at. I think I started loving you that first morning. I just didn't have the words for it, because my father took my words for that the same way yours took yours." "You have the words now," Sera said. "I have the words now." He pulled her against him, and she came, the way she had come off the step stool in the kitchen, the way she had come to him across 100 mornings, and the garden was dark and the roses were heavy and Manhattan glowed on the horizon, and the two children that two monsters had tried and failed to make in their image sat on a stone bench in a garden, free in the light, with all their doors unlocked and nothing left to hide. There was one more thing, though. There was always one more thing, the way there had been a light on the wall at the start, the small detail that meant the story was not as finished as it looked. 3 weeks after Desmond Calloway was released 3 states away, a letter arrived at the estate. Not for Sera, for Vittorio. Hand-delivered, through one of the channels men in his world keep open, the kind of letter that does not come through the mail because what it concerns does not belong in a mailbox. Vittorio read it alone in his study first, the way he read everything that might be dangerous, before deciding whether to bring it into the light he and Sera had built. He read it twice. And then he sat for a long time, looking at the photograph of Gianna on the mantel, the young woman in the white dress, and then at the door of the study, beyond which his wife was reading in her library with the cat in her lap and the scar showing in the lamplight. The letter was about Desmond. It was from a man Vittorio trusted, a man whose job was to know things, and it said that in the week since Desmond Calloway had been released, The small gray locksmith had not gone quietly into his defeat the way Vittorio's father had. He had been making calls. He had been asking questions, in the parts of the underworld where a question can be bought, about the Selvaggio family, about Vittorio, about the structure of the empire, about something specific, something the letter's author had not been able to fully trace, but something that suggested Desmond Calloway, having lost the lever of his daughter's shame, was now searching for a different lever entirely, a larger one, in the place where Vittorio was most exposed, in the business itself. In the one part of Vittorio's life that Sera did not yet fully know. Because there was a part of the empire Sera did not know, there was always a part. Vittorio had told her about his father, and the locked room and Gianna and the longer conversations, but there were things about the business, about how the empire actually ran, about debts and partners, and the particular vulnerability that every empire carries at its foundation, that he had not yet brought into the light, because some doors a man opens slowly, even for the person he trusts most, even after he has sworn that the lying is over. And Desmond Calloway, defeated in the foyer, stripped of his daughter's shame, had gone looking for that door. Vittorio folded the letter. He sat in his study and looked at the photograph of his first wife and the door behind which his second wife sat reading in the light, and he understood that he was holding, in his hand, the beginning of a thing that would test everything he and Sera had built. A thing that would ask whether the promise they had made each other, all the way in, both directions, no more locked rooms, could survive the discovery that Vittorio had one room left, one door he had not opened. And that a small gray man, 3 states away, had just found the handle. He stood up, he walked to the study door, and he made a choice, the choice they had taught each other to make, the hard one, the one their fathers had never made. He opened the door, and he walked into the library where his wife sat in the light, and he held up the letter, and he said the truest and most frightening words a man who had spent 40 years locking doors could say. "Sera," Vittorio said, "there's a room I haven't shown you yet, and I think it's time because your father just found the door, and I'd rather you hear what's inside it from me." She set down her book. The cat lifted its head, and in the warm lamplight of the room that had once been locked, the room that was now full of her books and her chair and her life in the open, Sera Selvaggio looked at her husband holding a letter, and she understood that the story was not over, that there was one more door, and that this time they would open it the way they had learned to open everything. Together, in the light, all the way in,